It is a Tuesday morning in London. The underground is packed, offices are filling up, coffee shops have queues out the door. 14 million people doing exactly what they do every Tuesday morning, without any reason to think today is different from any other day. And then the first clot reaches the surface. Not an army, not a wave. One creature stumbling out of a maintenance tunnel in West London, looking like a person who is very badly injured, and moving in a way that no injured person actually moves. Within 4 minutes, someone has filmed it on their phone. Within 11 minutes, the video has 40,000 views. Within 20 minutes, the Metropolitan Police have 2 officers on scene with no framework for what they are looking at and no protocol that applies. Within an hour, there are 9 clots on the surface, and nobody at any level of the response chain has yet used the word containment, because to use that word, you need to understand what you are containing. And nobody does yet. This is what would actually happen if killing floors monsters appeared in the real world tomorrow. Not whether the biology is theoretically possible. What actually happens to cities, governments, military forces, and ordinary people when something that was never supposed to exist suddenly does. If you have never played Killing Floor, you are in exactly the right place. Everything gets explained as we go. Let's get into it. Ooh. The clot problem is not the clot itself. In the game, it is the weakest enemy, slow individual. A single headshot ends it. Every new player learns within 5 minutes that the clot is manageable. In the real world, the clot's danger is almost entirely about the response it triggers rather than the damage it causes directly. Modern emergency response is built on the assumption that threats fit into known categories. A medical emergency gets one response. A violent person gets another. A chemical spill gets another. Every emergency service has protocols built around categories of threat that are understood before the response begins. The clot fits none of those categories. It looks like a person but does not respond to communication. It cannot be reasoned with, warned, or de-escalated. Standard police response is built almost entirely on the assumption that a threat can be deterred. The clot cannot. So the first hours would not be a dramatic military engagement. They would be a cascade of protocol failures in slow motion. Officers calling supervisors. Supervisors calling commanders. Each level trying to fit what is happening into an existing box before authorizing a response. And real scientists modeling this kind of outbreak found that a threat spreading at 90% infection efficiency per day would reduce global human survivors to 273 people within 100 days. The most dangerous thing about the clot is not what it does when it reaches you. It is the 18 to 24 hours of governmental paralysis before anyone accepts that existing protocols do not cover this. 18 to 24 hours is a long time when the threat keeps multiplying. By day 3, the military is deployed, and containment zones are holding. There is cautious optimism in government briefings. And then a Fleshpound walks through one of the containment zones. The adrenaline pump on its chest was designed to keep a failed clone alive, but modified to supply suppressants to calm it down. The problem is that when it takes damage, the pump floods it with adrenaline and stimulants instead. The more you shoot it, the more dangerous it becomes. Real military engagement doctrine is built entirely on the opposite principle. You cause enough damage to an enemy, and the enemy stops being a threat. Every weapon system, every tactical approach, every training protocol operates on this assumption. It is so deeply embedded in how militaries think that most soldiers have never been asked to consider an alternative. The first unit to engage a real Fleshpound would open fire, and the Fleshpound would get faster. They would increase fire. It would escalate further. By the time the commanding officer understood what was happening, the unit would be dealing with something moving at speeds infantry cannot evade, and hitting with force that body armor was never designed to withstand. The first Fleshpound encounter does not end with the Fleshpound being stopped. It ends with the unit being destroyed, and every officer above them watching the footage trying to understand what they just saw before the next one appears. By day 5, the military has adapted somewhat and containment is holding in some areas. And then the first siren appears inside a containment zone. The siren's sonic output in the game disrupts healing and damages everything around it. Players learn immediately to prioritize it because its presence makes every other encounter worse. In a real military operation, it would be the most tactically significant threat on the battlefield. Not because it kills directly, because it destroys the one thing that makes human military response effective: coordination. Modern military effectiveness relies almost entirely on coordinated communication. Remove that, and even a well-equipped force becomes a collection of individuals rather than a coherent response system. The siren's sonic output would destroy radio equipment, rupture eardrums, and induce vertigo severe enough to prevent aimed fire. All of this simultaneously across every member of a unit. A containment operation that was working becomes a rout the moment a siren enters the zone. The siren does not just cause damage, it teaches the military to be afraid of engaging at all. By day 10, something nobody anticipated happens. A Scrake is reported at a hospital. In Killing Floor, the Scrake was designed as a medical unit. The chainsaw arm was intended for rapid battlefield amputation. It rages when it takes a headshot and charges toward the source of damage. Hospitals are the most critical infrastructure in any disaster response. They are where the injured are taken, where the sick are treated, where the human cost of the outbreak is managed. The medical staff inside have no combat training. The layout is not designed for any defensive response. And the Scrake's rage mechanic means the first security officer who attempts a headshot makes it significantly more dangerous to everything around it. By the time a military unit arrives, the damage is done, and that damage takes months to rebuild during an active outbreak. This is the pattern that makes a real Z outbreak genuinely different from any crisis humanity has managed before. It does not just attack people, it learns which parts of the response infrastructure matter most and breaks those first. By day 30, the world looks genuinely different. Military forces have adapted to the Fleshpound. New communications protocols reduce the siren's impact. Critical infrastructure is being preemptively defended against Scrake encounters. Humanity is losing, but losing slowly enough that adaptation is happening. And then the Patriarch is reported in Paris. Kevin Clamley in his transformed state, massive armored body, a chain gun and rocket launcher integrated into his form, the ability to turn invisible and move through a combat zone completely undetected, capable of healing himself continuously. Everything that made the Fleshpound difficult applies here at a higher level. But the real tactical problem is simpler than all of that. You cannot target what you cannot see. Every adaptation humanity has made over 30 days assumes a visible enemy. Aerial targeting, guided munitions, coordinated ground engagement. All of it requires a target that can be located and tracked. The Patriarch removes that assumption completely. And the detail I keep coming back to is not the invisibility, it is the healing, because the invisibility is a tactical problem with a potential solution. The healing, combined with the invisibility, means every moment spent trying to find it is a moment it is recovering from whatever it has already taken. Time is not neutral in that situation. Time is working for the Patriarch. And then there is the Mire. Everything up to this point exists within the framework of biology as we understand it. Extreme, dangerous, requiring completely new approaches, but ultimately comprehensible within conventional scientific understanding. The Mire is something else entirely. Season 4 confirmed the Mire exists naturally at geological depth. An oil drilling operation in the North Sea struck it accidentally. It produces creatures classified as a completely separate category from anything Horzine engineered, not modifications of existing biology, something that emerges from the Mire itself, connected to an alternate dimension called the Dread Zone. And in a real-world scenario, the moment the Mire enters the picture, every system humanity has built breaks down. Containment protocols assume you understand the biology of what you are containing. The Mire does not operate within known biology. Military doctrine assumes physical vulnerabilities that sufficient force can exploit. Creatures whose origin is extra-dimensional do not necessarily share those vulnerabilities. Scientific response assumes you can study the threat and develop countermeasures. A substance whose properties extend beyond the physical dimensions that conventional science operates within cannot be fully studied using the instruments conventional science has built. The Clots and the Scrakes and the Fleshpounds are a hard problem. Real scientific modeling estimates around 3 years for humanity to stabilize with sufficient military response. Expensive in lives and resources, but within human capability. The Mire is not a harder version of that problem. It is a categorically different kind of problem that existing human capability was not built to address. And that distinction is the most genuinely unsettling thing this franchise has ever introduced. So what would actually happen? Day one is protocol failure. Not because governments are incompetent, but because the Clot is a category of threat that no existing protocol covers, and categorizing it correctly takes longer than it takes to spread. By day 30, humanity is adapting, losing, but adapting, learning, building around each new threat as it appears. And then the Mire surfaces somewhere in the world, and the question stops being how long will this take and starts being whether the tools humanity currently has are capable of addressing something that does not operate within the rules those tools were built around. The Killing Floor universe is not entirely impossible. Most of it is recognizable science pushed past the limits anyone currently has the ethics or the will to push it to. The part that is genuinely beyond current human understanding is the part that arrived last. And the people in the franchise dealing with all of it have 6 specialists, a base in Oregon, and a director who gave away $52 billion because she ran out of legitimate options. The more I sit with that, the more I think that might actually be the right kind of response. Not because 6 people and a base in Oregon is enough, but because the entire history of humanity dealing with things it did not understand suggests that the people who figure it out first are never the ones with the biggest armies. They are the ones paying the closest attention. That is what would actually happen if Killing Floor's monsters were real. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the next video in the series looks at the real-world history behind the corporation that created all of these things, and why a company that caused something like this could not only survive it, but grow more powerful from it. And drop a comment. The Fleshpound gets more dangerous the more you shoot it, and no military doctrine on Earth has a standard protocol for that. How would you actually stop one? Because after thinking about it properly, I keep coming back to the same answer. And the answer is that you probably would not stop it with weapons at all. Tell me what you think.